Thank you all for coming. Tonight is AWS Sydney Meetup number 53. I guess the last month, and Gary thankfully put it actually on the slide this one, so that's good. So this is Meetup number 53, which is awesome. So thanks for that, Gary. So tonight we got a good setup tonight. We have the sponsors this evening are Polar 7, so we normally come on the event. You'll meet us, we're going around in the white shirts. And tonight we have Conformity, who are a cloud assurance monitoring solution. They're going around in the purple shirts. So we're both sponsors tonight, which is good. So thanks to Conformity for putting up, and they've got a prize draw here of an Echo, which is awesome. So has everybody signed in and put their form over here to get an Echo? That'd be great. Cool. So thanks to Conformity for that. So just tonight, the layout of the agenda for this evening is we just do initial introductions, which is this session. Then we've got Michael Watts from Conformity, who's hiding down the back and should be up here, but he'll be speaking next. Then we have some networking and beers and pizza. Hopefully the pizza will turn up after his talk. And then we have Pinky Zan from Polar 7 doing a talk, and then we do Q&A, and then some prize draw and networking. So for the prize draw, to get the Echo, you got to hang around to the end, and we do pull it out of a hat. Who brought a hat? Anyone bring a hat? A top hat? No? Anyway, we'll pull it out of something, and we'll do that then. Cool. So speaking one tonight is Michael Watts from Conformity. He's going to speak about how our AWS account got hacked and what we did to ensure it never happened again, which is awesome. Has anybody else's account here been hacked? No? Everyone's good?
Say compromised.
Compromised. Yeah, compromised. Only reading what's there. So great. So thank you to Conformity. They're going to speak now. Thanks very much, and let's get on with it.
Thanks for coming, everyone, particularly in the wild and wet weather. It's actually myself and Conformity, who's our tech lead, also speaking tonight. I'm going to try really hard not to trip over this, so it could be.
Do you want two mics?
If we can, yeah.
Yeah.
We believe that everyone should be able to get the most out of their AWS, leverage the new services as they're released, and ultimately continually evolve their infrastructure without the fear of introducing vulnerabilities. Can everyone hear me? Is that okay. Get right in there. So to make this a reality, we've created a continuous assurance tool that provides peace of mind that your AWS account complies with the well-architected framework as defined by AWS. It's also an educational tool, not only providing insight into issues and violations, but also providing the rationale and resolution steps to actually fix those violations. So we've been working with AWS for probably about 5 years now. And throughout that time, we've seen, and also personally been a part of, some issues and violations that have caused issues amongst our actual production environments. So Conformity and I have been working not only as independent consultants, but also for our IT services company, Collaboration. So that's where we're talking from tonight. So our AWS journey probably started in a similar way to most of yours, creating a dev account via the console and being really amazed at how quick and easy it is to create an infrastructure stack. And this eventually evolved into using AWS for our dev and test accounts and constantly demonstrating the benefits back to the business. Now at this point, we probably only had 3 or 4 services in use, and there are only 2 users with access to our AWS. Pretty simple to monitor and pretty low risk. But by this stage, we started to gain some traction. Our development velocity was increasing, and our infrastructure costs were significantly decreasing. We even had the business coming to us, pushing AWS usage, which is fantastic. And by this point, we even started using AWS for our production accounts, which resulted in us being able to go from deploying once a month to daily. Once a month, we're lucky, to daily, or as often as we need it. The sky was the limit, basically. Is everybody else here using AWS in their production accounts? Primary infrastructure supply? Now, as you can imagine, this was huge. We were loving it, the business were loving it. It basically changed the way we do it. Now, the downside of this, or the upside of this, was it meant a rapid progression from one production system to an all-in approach. Again, fantastic. The only downside, being quite a large organisation that we're working with at the time, meant everybody, all the dev teams, needed to upskill on AWS. Not that big a deal, but it did make things interesting. As you can see from the slide, we started to realise that the more you use AWS, and the more services you use, but particularly the more users that have access to your AWS accounts, the higher the risk of vulnerabilities. Now, when I say vulnerabilities, I don't just mean security holes, ports being left open. I'm also talking about things like the architecture is not fault tolerant, or there's performance inefficiency. Anything that can actually affect your day-to-day business. Now, this is certainly the sweet spot, and I'm not trying to downplay getting to that all-in approach. It's a fantastic achievement, and it really will transform the business. But these are just some of those niggly things that we had to deal with. And the other, that I don't want to bore you with, but the other thing that we noticed with every organisation we worked with was the dramatic organisational change associated with an all-in cloud approach. Inevitably, there's going to be naysayers, or a group of people that don't really want you to succeed. It's usually the people that think they're going to become obsolete once you move to the cloud, and they're looking for any excuse for the fact. There was one organisation in particular that I worked at, we had to hide every single violation, every single issue we encountered, because the executives knew that would be the fuel these naysayers needed to squash AWS. Similarly, and I'm sure most of you have heard this story, there's been several startups that actually failed due to vulnerabilities that caused production outages they just couldn't recover. So again, certainly where we want to get to, but you really need to be ready for that all-in approach and have your monitoring and best practices in place before you get. So of those people that put their hand up in terms of being all in on the cloud or using it for your production accounts, is anyone willing to say how many users actually have access to your account, can get in there, make changes, whether it be dev, test, prod? Anyone willing to say? How many was that? 200. 200 people have access. Wow. That was more than I expected. So the organisations that I've seen are quite large, but probably range from 10 to 30 users with access to your accounts. Now, Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot here, if you pay attention. Sorry. You're an AWS certified solution architect, been working with AWS day in, day out for, what, 5 years now? I'll be honest. How many of these services would you say that you're an expert in? And when I say expert, you could use the service and comfortably know you're following the best practices.
I'd say half of them.
So half of those. So if you think back to that all-in approach, you had one proof of concept project that's made it through production, and now you're going, okay, let's push this across the organisation. We've seen such great results, we need to scale this. Think of the challenge for those IT experts that have been using, they are IT experts, they've been in the field for 10, 20 years. How do you take on such a beast, manage the infrastructure, and not put your organisation at risk? And from the organisation's point of view, how do you mitigate that? Everybody's heard when they delve into AWS, it's one click, it's fantastic. And in that first story that I told, you go into the console and you deploy your infrastructure, or create your infrastructure and deploy your application seamlessly. And that is the sort of, at least from my point of view when I started delving, that was the AWS myth. Now obviously you can do that, but once you get to a complex workload, auto-scaling, self-healing, multiple availability zones, that's not really possible anymore. Now, obviously, there's ways around this. Giles or Giles, however, I'm sure I just murdered that, If he's here, I apologise. But he gave a great presentation at last month's meetup about pets versus cattle. Now, if you've got to the point where you've sent all your pets off to the farm, you're using cattle exclusively, and everything's automated, fantastic, 2 thumbs up. You may not need to have a continuous monitoring tool, because you've validated the scripts that are used to build and destroy your infrastructure, and you can be sure that once you do your blue-green deployment or someone tampers with one of your environments, everything's going to be as it was before. If you're like the rest of us, or you're working with organisations that aren't quite there yet, you're going to need some sort of continuous monitoring tools. Otherwise, how do you know you're not at risk? Particularly if you've got 200 users in your account messing about. You look very relaxed, by the way. I'm pretty stressed. You check your email, there's something wrong. So that's the challenge, and that's what we've found. There's a few tools out there, and that's great. AWS itself provides the Trusted Advisor tool as part of the console. Quite good, but also at the same time quite limited. There's a number of open source tools. SecurityMonkey. Who uses SecurityMonkey? And do you use that in isolation, or is that as a tool package? Yeah, Trusted Advisor. And do you feel that gives you the level of coverage that you need? Yeah, I agree. So it's great. However, it doesn't cover all the services. And again, it's limited by the number of rules. There's 50 or so rules. And this list, I feel like every time I log into this console, this list grows. And I've got to change something. So I get it just the way I need. And then either the business comes and says, we really love this new application on the cloud. And by the way, it's a completely different architecture than we've done before. Or AWS, in its Infinite Wisdom, which is fantastic, introduces a new service, and we need to all become experts in it overnight. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's absolutely not all doom and gloom. Empowering your teams to not only manage development, but also deployment, your infrastructure and monitoring, it's fantastic, isn't it? It's enabled us to move away from that tedious and annoying deployment process of 5 to 10 years ago, where you wait around for a month, somebody's going to do something, and you might get your release or you might not. And when you get it, it's probably broken. It's really enabled continuous delivery. It's great for the dev teams, it's great for the organisation, and it's great for the customer. But with great responsibility, or say with great power, comes great responsibility. How do teams know they're not at risk? How does an organisation ensure that best practices are in place and that staff feel comfortable, number one, and also have adequate access to training and learning material? It's a tough challenge. Who here has heard of the shared responsibility model? Quite a few of you. You're in the right place. Good. So this is effectively, for those that haven't, very basically, it's basically AWS's us versus their mentality. What are they responsible security-wise, and what are you responsible for security-wise? So you're responsible for your resources and how they sit in the cloud. For example, how much access to and from the internet they have, and they're responsible for the overall security of the cloud, providing the right hardware, making sure their data centers don't go down in the flood, all that sort of stuff. I actually like to think of this quite simply, and I think the picture that depicts it is moving into a brand new house. You've left your old rundown house, your old rundown data center, you've moved into a brand new house, state-of-the-art security, it's all really fantastic, and then you go away for the weekend, leave the door open. Not a great idea. Not their fault, not AWS's fault, it's something you need to be aware of. So at this point, I'll stop boring you with the high-level stuff, and Mike will take us through the technical details around some of those mistakes and vulnerabilities we've seen along the way, what the consequences were, and what we've done to make sure they'd never happen again.
Thank you, Michael. So I was hired as a cloud architect consultant to the unfortunately I can't post the name for privacy reasons.
Just be right.
Yeah. Sorry, repeat. I was hired as a cloud architect with a company. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose the name for privacy reasons. To help with cloud migration and cloud initiative program they've been running for a while. When I got on board, they had 20 plus AWS accounts. Each AWS account has 5 plus users, and some of those users have MFA enabled, some don't. Root accounts are being used. MFA wasn't enabled for some of the root accounts. And there was no AWS usage in place. So that was immediately highlighted as a risk. And this is basically one example about security. So a developer who's working on a piece of application related to AWS checks in the code, thinking I might just go home and wrap up things for tomorrow, and he actually checked in the AWS credentials as well. So what happened was AWS would actively scan the GitHub public repository for AWS credentials, right? And the root account was notified about this exposure. At the same time, we all know that attackers are actually actively scanning public GitHub repositories for such information. So the next morning, as we come in, there are tens of large instances, extra large instances being launched into our account. And we got notified by our root account owner that our account might have been compromised. So we look at the account and we see, right, there's heaps of large instances running, mining Bitcoins probably, or whatever. So the first thing, as you can imagine, we did was to remove those AWS credentials, right? That's the first thing you do. And the second thing we did was to stop those extra large instances. Now, the question was asked, how can we assure this would never happen again? And we're talking about 20 different AWS accounts, each account having 5 or 10 IAM users in it. So what we did was, first and foremost, we created an AWS multiple account security strategy. What it is that you introduce a new type of account called identity account. And if there is one thing you take away from today's session, I really encourage you to go and implement this if you are using multiple AWS accounts. So with identity account, basically you allow your users to log into one central account. From there, they can actually easily switch to the other accounts. So instead of having 20 accounts and managing users in 20 different places, you have one centralized account called identity. You log into this account, and from there, you actually switch to the other account. And we are talking about hundreds of users, right? 100 basically. But when we consolidate those users, it was 30 plus IAM users, right? So you create users, IAM groups, IAM roles in this identity account. User log into this account. From there, they can switch to the other account. And you can actually do this practice for automation and everything else as well. The good thing about this approach is you have one consolidated console to look at to see if MFA is enabled for this user, to see if the AWS credentials are too old and you need to rotate them, right?
And I actually found this quite interesting because this is all publicly available information. And the organization that Mike's talking about had gone right down the path of that all-in approach. We're talking 2 years after they started dabbling in AWS production systems, critical production systems, online, and quite vulnerable. And this isn't because they just were lazy. There's a lot of information around AWS, but because it's quite new, it's not really common knowledge yet.
That's right. And with the identity account, as I said, you could easily manage your users and groups and everything related to those users. And you could just have a look at the console and see, if this user is unused, actually, never logged into this account, or the AWS credentials are unused, so you can decommission them, right? So that was the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we introduced a company-wide AWS usage policy. What it means is you could, for all those 20 accounts, you could just go and see what are the sort of workload I need for this account. For example, the test account in discussion didn't need to allow running large or extra large instances. We were just running some medium instances. We didn't have to allow 20, 30 large instances in this account, right? So with the policy, AWS policy, you can simply deny those, which means if you have access, admin access, you can't actually create those resources in the account. So that's one way to minimize your risk if your account got compromised for whatever reason, right? And in fact, you could actually raise a support ticket with AWS to say, I'm not running large instances in this account, could you please just restrict that for me?
And here's a prime reason why you probably should. So on the left, we've got our monthly bill to date for EC2, $842.19. Now after that event where the credentials were checked into GitHub, somebody got access and started mining the Bitcoins, the overnight bill went from 842 to 3,221, and we're only at risk for maybe an hour, or only actually exposed for maybe an hour.
Right. And the other aspect to this is you could actually enforce MFA multi-factor authentication when you have the identity account. So make sure you implement the identity account as well as the right policy, AWS usage policy for each account. So that would give you a very good level of defense. So you can make sure your account doesn't get compromised as much as you see with the first approach, and also in case it got compromised, the damage the attackers could do is quite minimal. So the third thing we did was to utilize official library from AWS called Git Secret. So Git Secrets prevents accidental code checking of AWS credentials. So we had to go and educate our developers and make sure they have this running. So you don't want to check in AWS credentials in any private or public repository. Having that set up on your machine, which would fail any code checking which includes the AWS credential. Yeah, sure. So the final piece was to just do the DevOps culture and automation. So that would take years, you guys know, but that's something that probably everyone needs to aim for. So this is another example. The previous one is security example. This one is more of a reliability issue that we dealt with. So very briefly, as you may know, in VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, you could use private subnets And actually, that's a best practice to run any workload in private subnets, right? So the thing I can think of that you might run in a private subnets are bastion or jumper boxes, NAT instances. In this case, we're talking about NAT instances. So in Sydney region, where we deployed this at the time, there were 2 availability zones. Now we got 3. Our design was, the implementation wasn't actually designed for failure. So what happened was, we were just running 1 NAT instances in this example, and that instance was scheduled for termination by AWS. And this happens, and we discussed, pets versus cattle, Phoenix servers. You have to design for failure all the time. You can't just assume that my NAT instance would run forever and nothing would actually stop that. So in this case, the NAT instance was quite critical into our implementation. So we were using the NAT instance to send SMSs, the payment gateway, and a lot of other integrations with the third-party applications. And our users had to notify us about, some part of the system not working. So what we did, very briefly, was we actually implemented 2 NAT instances into 2 auto-scaling group, minimum 1 instance, maximum 1 instance, so we could assure that at any time we have 2 instances running. And those instances in this were actually self-monitoring heartbeat. So they would know if the other one fails. So this is a good way to have highly available NAT. But again, back to our point about AWS innovating all the time, trying to utilize the best out of AWS implementation. AWS introduced a new service called AWS Managed Nav Gateway. So we can just forget about this one and just use the AWS Managed Service, because this is quite a common issue that everyone has seen.
Now this one really annoyed me. And you would imagine it would never happen. So your SSL certificate actually expires. Now obviously this didn't just expire and you weren't notified. Someone that manages your certificates got an email. Maybe they emailed someone in your team that used to work on the project. They've moved on and they just thought, no, it's not my problem anymore. The amount of times I've seen this happen is absolutely astounding. And if you've ever had to explain this to the business, to the executive as to why this happened, really difficult, really embarrassing. And you end up just finger pointing, oh, they got an email, they didn't tell me. And without constant monitoring or constant assurance, there's really no way to actually, unless you stick something in your calendar after you buy it, there's really no way to do this unless you rely on that single point of failure. It always comes down to, again, as Mike was saying, where the root access or the root account got notified. It's always that single point of failure, relying on one person to let you know or to let somebody on the team know.
So there's a couple of things I just want to add to this. For example, AWS introduced a new service called ACM, Amazon Certificate Management Service. So you could actually use that service instead of managing your own certificates. Or you could just use some sort of monitoring tool which would let you know 1 week, 1 month, days before the expiry date, right? So you would take action and replace those certificates in time.
So what have we done to solve this? Now, obviously we've implemented best practices, we set up a wiki, or we educated the wider technical team. But again, it comes down to that single point of failure. No matter how much you put on a wiki, no matter how many best practices you try and put in place across an organization, things are going to slip through, it's impossible. So what we've done is we've actually built a continuous monitoring tool that scans your account against around about 200 automated best practice checks and gives you a snapshot of your compliance level. So this is just a quick live demo. I'm only going to give you a sort of 30-second overview. So we're looking at the dashboard. We've logged in, we've linked our accounts. You can have as many accounts as you like. In this instance, just a test account, we've got 2 accounts linked. You could have 30 or 40, and your home page will show you a snapshot of your compliance against those 4 pillars of the well-architected framework. So performance, reliability, security, and cost optimization. So we can see that we've got 76% compliant against security. Could be better. You can click improve and go and find the violations that are causing you to have that lower compliance. You can actually go into a single account and see what are my failures per account, or in this instance, we're just going to look at all accounts and see the snapshot. And down the bottom here, we're looking at our most critical failures. And I believe that one of them here is actually one of the examples that Mike gave earlier. But effectively, this is going to rank your violations according to the severity that we've come to understand, not only for the well-architected framework, but also in collaboration with Amazon. So you notice that Rich has just clicked on the resolution steps. So as I said before, we don't just try and tell you what's wrong with your account. We'll try and give you the rationale, why we think it's very high, and then the audit steps, both via the console and the command line, and then the resolution steps. So if you choose to actually go and fix it, you just go in, follow these steps, either grab the commands or go into the console and fix it yourselves. At that point, I'll open it up to questions.
So AWS had a service called AWS Topic Rules, which is tries to reduce things in terms of like governance and stuff like that. Do you leverage that, or are you?
We're certainly not competing against it. I'll let Mike take this one in a moment. At this stage, we're not integrating into that service. It is on our roadmap. We're looking to have that just before the launch, which is rapidly approaching on 1 September.
Which service was it? Yes, that's on our roadmap, yeah.
The question was, is that a competitor or is that something that we're...
No, it's not actually. We could actually utilize that. Currently, we're using the AWS API to scan your account. Having the inventory data would give us more data that we need to run our best practices against, basically. And that's on roadmap to actually integrate with AWS Config.
We're also looking to integrate into CloudTrail as well, so we can actually not only see the violation, but see who caused it. We can say, bang, let's notify this person straight away. It's their action that caused the issue.
The other thing we are trying to implement using AWS Config at this stage is a configuration management database. So imagine you could see how many EC2 instances you're running in which region across all your accounts. So an inventory that would tell you, all the information about, your AWS usage across all accounts.
Any other questions? So just one last thing, please remember to register to win the Echo if you want at the end of the night. And if you've got if you want any more information, either come and see us during the break, or feel free to go online and just register your interest, and we'll keep you posted with how we're progressing.
Awesome, thanks. So can I do a quick show of hands? Has anybody here had an SSL cert timeout at some stage in their past and just kind of went, no? Yeah, there's a few, yeah, and you just go, damn it. Can you imagine if you had some tool that told you that before it happened? That would be awesome. That's a small example, right? This does a lot more than that. So
that's all we do.
Check it. No, there's a lot more than that, obviously, but just pick something, check it out, come talk to the guys. Guys, thank you very much for this. Yeah. And,